You have 30 days to remove that dangerous animal from the premises or we'll escalate to legal action. That's the letter I found duct taped to my front door, right next to a fresh scratch gouged into the wood. My dog, a 6-year-old golden retriever named Buckley, was curled up on the porch like always, tail thumping lazily. Buckley wouldn't hurt a fly. Hell, he once tried to share his kibble with a squirrel. But according to Nadine Johnson, president of the Willow Creek HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, Buckley was now a threat to community safety. I'm Xander Fields, 39, night shift surgical nurse, and dead tired of HOA nonsense. I moved into Willow Creek for the quiet, not for power-tripping middle-aged women with pixie cuts and clipboards. The trouble started a week ago when Buckley barked just once at Nadine's yappy Pomeranian, Cupcake, who had wandered into my yard off leash and tried to hump Buckley's leg. Nadine stormed over like I'd trained Buckley to attack. "That animal of yours is out of control," she screeched. "I'm reporting this." I figured she was bluffing. She wasn't. Now, this wasn't just a warning. Nadine cited some obscure part of the HOA bylaws about aggressive pets, which supposedly gave them the right to ban unpredictable animals. She even attached blurry evidence, a photo of Buckley yawning that she claimed showed his teeth bared in aggression. I knocked on her door the next day, Buckley on a leash beside me. She opened it with a smug little tilt of her head and crossed arms. "Nadine," I said calmly, "you know Buckley's not dangerous. He barked once. He lunged," she snapped. "Cupcake was traumatized. Cupcake was in my yard," I said, keeping my voice level. "Off leash. That's a violation of your own HOA rules." "I'll be the judge of that," she said, and then slammed the door. Oh, it was on. I started digging. I pulled the HOA bylaws, highlighted every section relating to pets, and found something interesting. The clause she quoted was meant for animals with documented police reports or animal control citations. Buckley had neither. I also noticed something else. Cupcake had bitten 2 kids last year. I remembered the incident because both kids lived on my block, and I'd patched one up myself. I visited their parents. "Did the HOA ever do anything when your kids got bit?" "Covered it up," said one dad. Nadine said it was an accident and refused to file a report. Next stop, the town clerk's office. I requested HOA filings, financials, and meeting minutes. Took me 2 hours before I found it. Nadine had been quietly amending rules without proper votes. Several entries were marked emergency provision, which allowed her to bypass resident approval. But the kicker? The HOA was technically operating under an expired charter. They hadn't renewed their legal status with the county in over a year, which meant legally they had no power. I stared at the documents, heart pounding. Nadine Johnson had declared my golden retriever a public menace, while covering up her own dog's bites, rewriting rules in secret, and running a legally defunct HOA. Buckley looked up at me from the car floor, tail wagging like we just pulled into the dog park. "Buddy," I said, "we're going to take her down." The next morning, after catching 4 hours of sleep, I drove down to City Hall and requested a meeting with the municipal compliance officer. Her name was Dana Patel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had the kind of energy that suggested she didn't tolerate fools. I laid out copies of the expired registration, the emergency provision abuses, and the altered meeting minutes. She barely blinked as she scanned the documents. "They haven't filed a single annual report in 2 years," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "And that emergency clause? That only applies to natural disasters or structural failures, not neighborhood politics." "So what happens if an HOA has no legal standing?" I asked. "They can't enforce squat," she replied. "Technically, they're just a volunteer club right now. No authority. If they've issued fines or threats under that expired status, that's fraud. If they've collected dues, that's embezzlement." My pulse kicked up. "Would that be something your office investigates?" Dana gave a dry chuckle. "No, that's above my pay grade. But the county DA's office? They'd be very interested." By noon, I had a flash drive full of scanned documents and a scheduled appointment at the DA's office the following week. But I didn't want to wait that long to make a dent. I needed the neighborhood to see it for themselves. That afternoon, I walked door to door with a stack of flyers. Not angry rants, just fax copies of the expired charter, a breakdown of the HOA's unauthorized rule changes, and a list of citations they'd issued in the past year. I included a note. You are not legally obligated to pay fines issued after the charter expired. One by one, neighbors started talking. A retired mechanic named Harvey told me he'd gotten a $200 fine for leaving his garage door open for 10 minutes. A single mom on the corner said they'd threatened to tow her car for non-compliance with aesthetic standards because she had a bumper sticker they didn't like. People were fed up. They just didn't know they could fight back. By the next night, someone had taped a handwritten sign to the HOA's community bulletin board. Stop paying. Ask for proof. They have none. At first, I thought Nadine might back off, quietly retreat, but I underestimated her ego. 2 days later, I came home to find a pair of county animal control officers waiting on my porch. One was flipping through a notepad. The other wore that look people get when they know they're being used but have to follow procedure anyway. Are you Mr. Fields? The taller one asked. Yeah. What's this about? We received a formal complaint that your dog attacked a resident. We're required to investigate. I tilted my head. Did the complaint come with any documentation? Witness statements? Medical records? The shorter officer looked uncomfortable. No, sir. Just a written report from. Nadine Johnson. Come on, I said, gesturing to Buckley, who was inside napping in a sunbeam. You can meet him. They followed me in. Buckley lifted his head lazily, licked his chops, and wagged once before rolling over. The officers exchanged a look. Has he ever shown aggression before? One asked, almost apologetically. Not unless you count stealing socks. They left without filing anything. But I knew Nadine wasn't done. That night, I installed motion-activated cameras on every corner of my property. Not just for Buckley's sake, because if she was willing to fabricate an attack, she might try something worse. Sure enough, 3 nights later, the footage caught a figure sneaking through the side yard. She wore a hoodie, but the limp and the handbag gave her away. Nadine. She paused by the fence, pulled something from her purse, and tossed it into the yard. I checked the spot the next morning. A half-eaten chicken wing, bone and all. Buckley hadn't touched it. He's weirdly picky, but that didn't matter. I bagged it and drove it straight to a vet clinic I knew from work. Toxicology confirmed it had traces of rat poison. I stared at the report, a cold knot in my chest. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was criminal. I handed the footage and the report to the sheriff's department that afternoon. The deputy didn't mince words. If your neighbor threw that, she could be facing felony charges, he said. Animal cruelty, attempted poisoning, trespassing. Possibly more if there's evidence of coordinated harassment. I nodded slowly. There's more. I gave him a copy of the HOA documents, the expired filings, the altered provisions. He took one look and called in a second officer. Within 48 hours, the DA's office launched a formal investigation. Nadine must have sensed things were unraveling because she went on the offensive. She called an emergency HOA meeting, though with the charter expired. It was more of a glorified coffee klatch and invited all residents. I went mostly to watch the fireworks. It was held in the clubhouse, a space usually used for birthday parties and HOA yoga. Nadine stood at the front with her clipboard and a fresh perm, flanked by 2 board members who looked increasingly nervous. Our community is under threat, she began dramatically. There are individuals trying to dismantle the very structure that keeps us safe. They're spreading lies, disrupting peace, undermining our authority. Which you don't have, I said, stepping into the room. Because your charter expired 20 months ago. Gasps scattered through the crowd. Nadine's eyes narrowed. You're not on the speaking list. Neither are the truth and the law, apparently, I said. But here's a copy of the county's statement confirming your HOA has no legal standing. I handed it to the nearest neighbor, who began reading it aloud. Every line felt like a nail in her coffin. People started murmuring, some angry, some stunned. Then I dropped the final hammer. And while we're on the subject of safety, here's a veterinary report confirming that someone threw poisoned meat into my yard. And here's the security footage of Nadine doing it. I turned my tablet around. The room fell silent as the video played. Nadine, caught in full color, committing a felony. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice said, "That's attempted murder of a dog." Nadine's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Before she could bolt, two plainclothes deputies stepped through the door. "Ma'am," one said, "we need to speak with you outside." She didn't move. The other stepped forward. "Now." They escorted her out under a stunned silence. The next morning, a county press release confirmed the investigation. Nadine Johnson was being charged with attempted animal cruelty, falsifying HOA documents, and misappropriation of homeowner dues. The HOA's bank account was frozen pending audit. The board resigned en masse within the week. I stood on my porch that evening, watching the sunset while Buckley nuzzled my leg. Harvey walked over with a couple of beers. "Didn't think anyone could take her down," he said, handing me one. "But you did it." I raised my bottle. "To Buckley." He barked once, just loud enough to make Cupcake yelp from across the street. For once, no one complained. The days following Nadine's arrest reshaped the entire neighborhood's rhythm. For the first time in years, the constant trickle of passive-aggressive notices in mailboxes stopped. No more sudden violations for improper mulch texture or non-compliant mailbox flags. People actually started talking to each other, not whispering about fines or HOA rumors over hedges, but real conversations. On the second Saturday after the arrest, I found myself helping Harvey install a new fence panel while across the street, 3 neighbors organized a spontaneous cookout on someone's front lawn. But the fallout was far from over. The county's audit team arrived just after dawn that Monday. 2 plain sedans parked outside the former HOA office, a converted pool house, and 5 investigators carried out bankers' boxes and hard drives under the eyes of a small crowd. No one stopped them. There was no one left in charge to do so. I didn't plan to get involved beyond what I'd already done. But 3 days later, I got a call from the Assistant District Attorney, Olivia Raines. She asked if I could come downtown to answer some questions about a few financial entries they'd found in the HOA's records. The conference room was windowless, lit by fluorescent panels that hummed faintly. Olivia was younger than I expected, probably mid-30s, sharp suit and sharper eyes. 2 other individuals joined us, a forensic accountant named Talia and an officer from the County Fraud Division. Olivia started by sliding a folder across the table. "Recognize that signature?" she asked. I glanced down. "That's Nadine's." "No doubt." Talia leaned forward, tapping a printed ledger. "This entry shows a payment of $24,000 to a consulting firm called Southgate Neighborhood Solutions." "So, it's not a real company," she said. "We traced the bank account. It's registered to Nadine's cousin in Arizona who works at a car wash." Olivia added, "We believe she laundered HOA dues through that account. There are 5 transfers like this, totaling over $110,000, all marked as community improvement consulting." I stared at the pages. That money came from annual dues? "Every cent," Olivia said. And she didn't stop there. She submitted multiple invoices from a landscaping contractor who doesn't exist. Same handwriting on all of them. And she had access to the HOA debit card, Talia added. The one she used to pay for airline tickets, a spa retreat, and a patio bar set she had delivered to her sister's house in Jacksonville. "She's going to prison, isn't she?" I asked. Olivia didn't hesitate. "We're charging her with wire fraud, embezzlement, falsifying public documents, and animal cruelty. Combined, she's looking at over 25 years. I exhaled, but Olivia wasn't done. "We're also investigating whether she manipulated property valuations to sabotage sales. There's a pattern of her reporting minor infractions to realtors right before closings. 3 sales fell through last year alone after last-minute complaints." I shook my head. She was using her position to control who moved in. Exactly, Olivia said. Any chance you still have that security footage of her trespassing? I do, I said. Backed up in 3 places. We'll need it for court, she said. And we may need you to testify. I agreed. After everything, it didn't sit right to walk away before the job was finished. Back in Willow Creek, the pool house sat abandoned. Weeds crept through the cracks in the walkway and someone had removed the HOA office sign. Still, the absence of authority created a vacuum. A few residents floated the idea of forming a new board, but no one wanted a repeat of Nadine. Then, at a gathering hosted on a neighbor's front lawn complete with folding tables and a grill belching ribs smoke, someone suggested forming a neighborhood council instead. Informal. Rotating volunteers. No dues, no fines, no power grabs. I didn't volunteer, but I offered to help draft the agreement. And I made one thing clear. No one, I said, has the right to use a position in this neighborhood to bully people, threaten pets, or control who lives here. A few heads nodded. One woman, a teacher named Lexi, added, and if anyone tries, we do what Xander did. We push back. I didn't expect applause, but I got a few claps anyway. 2 weeks later, I received a subpoena for Nadine's trial. It was scheduled for early fall, giving the DA's office time to collect formal statements from affected homeowners. I wasn't the only one called Harvey, the single mom with the towed vehicle threats. Even the teenage boy who'd filmed Cupcake biting him the year prior, all of us were witnesses to the pattern. In preparation, Olivia walked me through the trial process and the evidence presentation. She's pleading not guilty, Olivia said. But with the paper trail, video, and toxicology report, her defense attorney doesn't have a lot to work with. She's not just going to own it. She's claiming she was framed, Olivia said. That the board acted without her knowledge. That the financial records were doctored after the fact. But we have digital timestamps. And your footage shows her delivering documents herself. The trial began on a humid Thursday morning. The courtroom was half filled with residents from Willow Creek, most of them wide-eyed and whispering. Nadine entered in a gray suit, her hair styled into a stiff helmet of curls. She avoided eye contact with everyone. When I took the stand, Olivia asked me one question first. Why did you get involved? I looked across the room, past the rows of reporters and notepads, straight at Nadine. Because she said my dog was dangerous, I said. And if she'd lie about that, what else was she lying about? The cross-examination was brief. Nadine's attorney tried to cast me as a disgruntled resident with a grudge. I kept my answers calm, precise. I didn't need to exaggerate. The documentation spoke louder than anything I could say. On the 4th day, the prosecution unveiled the full financial timeline. Each payment traced. Each false invoice matched to handwriting samples. The judge's face remained unreadable, but the jury shifted noticeably during the testimony. On the 6th day, Olivia played the video, the one from my security camera, and the courtroom fell silent. You could hear Nadine's shoes crunching gravel. The moment she tossed the poisoned meat over the fence drew an audible gasp. The verdict came on the 9th day. Guilty on all counts. Nadine was sentenced to 12 years with eligibility for parole after 7. She was also ordered to repay over $120,000 in restitution and barred from holding any official position or managing community funds for life. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse not with satisfaction but with something quieter relief. Back in Willow Creek, things settled into a new rhythm. No one tried to revive the HOA. The neighborhood council met monthly, usually over coffee in someone's garage. People started painting their houses whatever color they actually liked. One guy put up a gnome village in his front yard. Kids started playing in driveways again. One afternoon, I found a note tucked under a jar of homemade treats on my porch. No signature. Just 6 words. Thanks for standing up for us. Buckley sniffed the jar and wagged as if to suggest it was safe to eat. I gave him one and pocketed the rest. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. Not managed, not controlled, just lived in. And that finally was enough. The day after the sentence was handed down, a plain white envelope arrived at my door, addressed by hand. No return address. Inside was a single sheet, a formal notice from the property title office. It confirmed what I'd been hoping for. Willow Creek's HOA designation had been officially revoked. Not suspended, not under review. Revoked. Permanently. That bit of paper changed everything. Without the charter, the neighborhood's deed restrictions tied to the HOA lost their enforceability. That meant no future board, no matter how well-intentioned, could reinstate the same kind of power Nadine had abused. The county's land use office had updated the zoning index, and Willow Creek was now listed as a standard residential neighborhood. Just like that, the last shadow of her reach was gone. Still, not everything had settled. I hadn't seen the last of the fallout. 2 weeks later, Olivia Raines called again. This time, her tone was different, less procedural, more urgent. "We found something," she said. "It's bigger than we thought." I met her at the district attorney's office again. She walked me into a conference room where a wall had been turned into a timeline. Dozens of printed emails and scanned documents were pinned up with string connecting them. It looked like something out of a police procedural, except all the lines pointed to one name. Nadine hadn't acted alone. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to a black and white scan of a man's driver's license. "Derek Monroe," Olivia said. "He's a licensed real estate agent based out of Tallahassee. He's also Nadine's former business partner. They co-founded a property consultancy 7 years ago, shut it down after only 9 months. But here's the kicker: he handled 3 of the failed home sales in Willow Creek. And each time, there was a sudden HOA violation that killed the deal." I leaned in. "You think they were tanking sales on purpose?" "We know it," Olivia said. One of the buyers came forward. Monroe told her the neighborhood was too exclusive for her family. When she tried to push back, she got a letter from Nadine citing a restricted occupancy clause that doesn't exist anywhere in the bylaws. Talia, the forensic accountant, had been standing quietly by the window. Now she stepped forward and added, "We believe they coordinated a scheme to manipulate property values, drive out certain buyers, keep prices low, and quietly buy up homes through shell companies." I exhaled through my nose. "How many?" "5 are confirmed." Olivia folded her arms. "But we think they were planning more. We've issued a warrant for Monroe. He skipped town 2 days ago. Any chance he ends up in court? We flagged his passport. He'll either show up or get picked up. And if he doesn't, we'll prosecute Nadine for conspiracy." Information's already stacked against her. What happens to the homes they bought? Frozen under court order. If we confirm fraudulent intent, they'll be seized. So Nadine hadn't just been a vindictive neighbor with too much free time. She'd been orchestrating a racket. Discrimination, fraud, and attempted monopoly under the guise of a neighborhood association. Later that week, a county inspector started knocking on doors. Not to enforce anything but to gather statements. He was collecting documentation to help classify the entire HOA as a criminal entity, which would prevent any future board from ever using the same name or structure again. The inspector, an older man with a clipboard and thick-rimmed glasses, stopped by my house last. "Mr. Fields, I'm here to confirm a few details about the association's previous conduct." I nodded. "Sure, come on in." We sat at my dining table. Buckley rested his chin on my foot. The inspector scribbled notes as I confirmed timelines, names, and specific events. But at one point, he looked up and asked, "Did you ever feel personally targeted by Ms. Johnson's actions?" I hesitated. "I think she saw my job, my hours, and figured I wouldn't notice what she was doing," I said. "But she crossed a line when she came for my dog. That's when I knew it wasn't just petty behavior. It was control." He nodded. "One more thing. The county is considering offering restitution to residents who paid illegitimate fines. We'll need help organizing proof of payments." I offered to help with that too. Over the next month, I worked with a small group of volunteers to collect records. People brought boxes of paperwork, digital receipts, and even cell phone screenshots. We compiled everything and submitted it to the county restitution board. In total, we documented almost $70,000 in fines issued after the HOA's charter expired. By October, letters began arriving with checks. Small amounts, 200 here, 500 there, but enough to make people feel like something had truly changed. On the legal front, Monroe was picked up at a hotel in Baton Rouge. His arrest made the local news. He was charged with wire fraud, housing discrimination, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. During processing, he tried to claim he was just a contractor who didn't know the HOA was expired. The emails Olivia uncovered told a different story. He and Nadine had been emailing weekly, coordinating sales, flagging buyers, even discussing long-term demographic shaping. That phrase alone turned the case from fraud to something much darker. At trial, the prosecution didn't hold back. They presented a spreadsheet Monroe had kept labeled Red Line Adjustments. It listed potential buyers by race, income, and family size with color-coded outcomes. When the jury saw that, two of them visibly stiffened in their seats. Nadine's defense broke apart. She changed her plea mid-trial, guilty on all financial charges and conspiracy. In exchange, the animal cruelty charge remained on record but wasn't pursued further in sentencing. The judge handed her a longer term, 17 years, with no parole for at least 10. Monroe got 13. With both of them out of the picture, the state moved to dissolve the shell companies and auction off the fraudulently acquired homes. Proceeds went back into a fund for neighborhood development managed not by a board but by the city. The ripple effect hit other neighborhoods too. Turns out Nadine had given workshops at regional HOA conferences, taught others how to streamline enforcement and protect neighborhood character. Those trainings were now being audited. The state assembly introduced new legislation requiring annual certification for HOA leadership and mandatory third-party audits of their finances. 6 months after the trial, Willow Creek looked different, not just on paper but in spirit. The Gnome Village had grown into a sprawling installation complete with fairy lights and a tiny gnome taco truck. Kids painted murals on their garage doors. One woman opened a little library box filled with everything from spy novels to gardening guides. The neighborhood council still met now in rotating backyards. They didn't vote on people's lawns or holiday decorations. They planned potlucks and emergency preparedness drills. Someone even started a group chat, which mostly turned into shared dog photos and lost cat sightings. I stayed involved, but in the background. I had no interest in leading anything. I just wanted to make sure no one ever used a clipboard and a made-up rule to decide who belonged. One evening I came home to find Buckley sitting by the porch steps, tail wagging like clockwork. Next to him, a small note had been taped to the railing. It was written in blocky, uneven handwriting. "Thanks for saving our street." No name. Just a drawing of a dog with a goofy grin and a cape. I scratched Buckley behind the ears and sat beside him on the steps. The sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting the street in a warm orange glow. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we weren't just surviving the neighborhood. We were living in it. Together.